Preseason testing is right around the corner, and here are 5 things that you should watch for as the 2025 F1 cars hit the track for the first time in public. Before we get started, be sure to like, subscribe, and follow at the Pitwall Pod. We're really trying to grow this channel this year, so subscribing helps us out. Like and share, all that good stuff. Help us out, guys. It really means a lot. All right, coming in at number 1, the most obvious one is Ferrari. It's all about Ferrari. So first things first, Lewis Hamilton, first time in public, more or less, unless you were on the bridge at Maranello, on TV, driving the Ferrari. This is going to be a big deal and a big story, but I think more closely, a lot of people are going to watch this. How quickly does it get dialed in? There's all these reports coming out of Maranello this last week that, Lewis Hamilton was 0.8 seconds slower than Leclerc's fastest time. And, what does that really mean? Who's to say? But it is something to keep an eye on, because it's going to be very interesting seeing the best driver of all time coming in against somebody that has already driven in this car for so much time. There's likely going to be a deficit. And I think that's what a lot of people are going to have take some time to really accept. That's not to say that he's going to be completely screwed by the time we show up to Australia, but he's probably gonna have to put in a couple hundred laps to really get a feel for this car. And same for all the other drivers. There's so many other drivers in new situations, and we'll talk about that more later in the video. And still under the same vein, another really interesting thing about Ferrari that several places have reported on is that they're reportedly going to stress their engine a little bit more this year to try and prepare for the 2026 engine regulation change. And that's something to keep an eye on. Are they going to have any sort of reliability trouble? Is there going to be, any sort of stoppage in running time that maybe hurts Lewis Hamilton's acclimation or Charles Leclerc's? I mean, it's still a new car to him, even though he's driven it for the last couple of years. Every car is very different, as all these drivers will tell you. And even if the power unit woes don't show their hand in preseason testing, there's a chance that it shows up later in the season. And this year's going to be quite interesting because they just announced that you can take as many gearboxes as you want to. So maybe they put more pressure on them, but of course that will cost them in the cost cap. So anyway, this is a very interesting thing to keep an eye on of how Lewis does, how Ferrari's car does, and just in general, I think they're probably the favorite to win the title this year. So how are they starting off? Are they actually the fastest car? Number 2 is about Aston Martin. And the reason Aston Martin is so interesting is, of course, they got Adrian Newey, but he's showing up in March for the first time. So while they've updated the car, it's interesting to see whether or not they'll actually stick to these changes, or if they're actually good, if they've set a good base for him, if he's going to worry about it at all, really, or if they're just going to go to the 2026 regulations and he'll start there. We all watched how Aston Martin surprised everybody in 2023 and had a great car and then just fell off from there, and truthfully have not brought a great update to their car since then. Every time they revert back to an older spec, they get faster. So does changes mean they're going to be slower, or does changes just mean something different for Adrian Newey to start with? There's all these images that have been coming out the last couple days of some potential changes that they may have made to make the car easier to work with, but that remains to be seen, and that's why it's number 2. On a similar note, number 3 is all about Red Bull. Last year, you could argue that Red Bull left the Constructors' Championship on the table. Obviously, Checo did not do very well, and there's a potential that if he had done better, they may have been able to bring home the Constructors' Championship, when on average over the season, they had probably the second fastest car. And obviously, they have this non-rookie in Liam Lawson, so that's pretty interesting. But the biggest story, and the reason this related to Aston Martin, is they no longer have Adrian Newey. Now, they did not improve last year, so maybe a change will be good, but it's hard to say that losing Adrian Newey is a good thing. Well, so we'll be looking to see if they got rid of some of their problems, such as, being able to ride the curbs and stuff like that they experienced in 2024, and just in general, what kind of philosophy direction they're taking for this year. Number 4 is very interesting to me personally, and that's all about Mercedes. Mercedes has been being super secretive this year, almost as secretive as they used to be in like the W10, W11, W12 days, when they would come out with just an absolute amazing car. But it's really hard to believe that they would actually come out with a decent car, considering that every time that there's been a long break recently, it has not worked out well for them. Winter testing never turned out well for them in this era. Every time there's a summer break, there seems to be a problem. But like I said, they're being very secretive, and there's also some stuff going on behind the scenes that's pretty fascinating, such as the Ineos being gone on top of the car. That's pretty unusual, and we're hearing about all these financial strains that are going on at Ineos and whether or not they can afford the sponsorship, even though that they own some of the team, but maybe their ownership has cut back. So there's that going on. The main thing that they're talking about is that Mercedes has apparently improved the operating window of the W16 from the W15. You could make the argument that Mercedes had the fastest car when they were in the operating window. When they hit that operating window, no one could catch them, really. I mean, they got a 1-2 in Las Vegas. They won Silverstone, Austria. Like, these were not things that even me as a Mercedes fan were expecting at the time. All the reports are that they are very, very confident, that George Russell's very confident, and that they believe that this base not only has a wider window, but also leaves them more opportunity to improve throughout the season. And they believe that they're going to be competing for the Constructors' Championship in Abu Dhabi at the end of the season. But who's to say? They could come out with the 5th fastest car again, and that would not surprise me and would only disappoint me. But they could come out with a really good car, and that would be an interesting dynamic with Lewis just having left, especially if somehow they're better than Ferrari, which I doubt. And number 5, finally, let's talk about some of the lower teams on the grid here. So Haas and Alpine are doing some pretty interesting things this year. Obviously, this is the last year of a regulation cycle, so you have to kind of toss up how much effort do you want to put into this season versus, if you show up to the first race, you're slowed, you just go and just forget the whole rest of the season and just worry about 2026. That's a toss-up. So Alpine is reusing their chassis from last year, which, is not great to start out with. And apparently Haas is reusing a lot of what they did last year. So would that indicate that they're going to be slower than everybody else? Because think about it. If all these teams go away, and let's give everybody the benefit of the doubt and say over winter, they come up with a couple tenths that will make them faster from the previous year's car, right? That's the theory, at least. Well, if Haas and Alpine didn't change that much, even though they would have started as the 5th and 6th fastest car, does that now make them the 7th and 8th or 8th and 9th or even 10th fastest car? Or have they made the right decision because if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Now, in Haas's case, you could argue they had a pretty good season all year. Alpine, they started off rough and then got better. So it's really tough to say. Or does this give them more opportunity to continue to bring updates to this base already that they didn't have to, spend time developing a new chassis? So all of that is a very interesting thing to watch. And I think that's going to be very apparent very quickly in F1 testing. There's a lot of other stories, but these are just 5 things that you can watch for at this F1 testing. And before I go, I just want to mention, keep in mind, testing is testing, but also it's not. So where everybody's always saying, oh, testing is testing, it doesn't mean anything. But I did pull up what happened last year. And in 2024, day 1, Max Verstappen topped the timesheets. Who won the championship? Max Verstappen. But also on the first day, George Russell is pretty high up, and Mercedes did not have the fastest car last year. So I think you can gain a lot of information, but not all of the information until Q3 of Australia of the first race. With that said, stay tuned because we're about to get really into this season. So be sure to like, subscribe, and follow at the Pitwall Pod, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.